Yeah, that would be, oh. Otherwise, the room packed with people isn't able to hear me. I'm talking about SIWECOS. That's a CMS security project funded by the German government. And I'm David. I'm a Joomla nerd for almost 15 years now. I started with Membo, and now I'm on stage on a Drupal conference after having talked at a WordCamp, at a Contao conference. So I wander around at CMS events from time to time. Within the Joomla community, I had various national and international roles. That's me in the crowd of the Joomla World Conference in San Francisco, I think 2012. Yeah, since then I walked through various teams. And that's my current team. That's Joomla's security strike team. As you can see, it's highly diverse. We really appreciate women in our team and other people than white males. That's something that we definitely need to work on. I realized this badly when I took the picture or looked at the picture after it has been taken. It's an all-volunteer team. That's my current role in the Joomla project, but I'm a Drupal core contributor. Isn't that cool? I once reported a security issue that we had in Joomla that also could be applied to Drupal. So you're welcome. But no worries, I'm going to stop to talk about Joomla. I come in peace, even though Joomla is a very good CMS, big time, and you should use it. I'm here to talk about SIWECOS. The underline translated would say on the safe side. That's German because it's a German funded project. SIWECOS itself says secure websites and content management systems, so that's where it's coming from. Before we get into details, I think it might be interesting for you to learn how this whole story, the whole journey started, which might bring us into a little time lapse here. It brings us back in 2012, where this lovely picture was taken. A few of you might recognize the face on the left, which is Hagen Graf, which I think is involved, at least in the German-speaking Drupal community, for quite a while. And the other guys are Ben from Typo 3. The guy in the middle is Robert Windisch from WordPress, who's also around here. The other guy is from Magento, and I honestly forgot his name. I think it was Robin. And the guy on the right, that's me. That photo was taken at CeBIT, the world's biggest computer and IT fair, at least it was, back in the old days, which took place in Hanover in Germany. And this photo was taken because a German hosting company had a very brilliant marketing idea. They realized that nobody at all is interested in their products, but a lot of people love CMS. And so what they did was they invited those open source CMS to have a small booth at their large booth, free of charge. They even paid you travel and hotel. The only condition was that each and every time someone said, and what about hosting, was that you had to point up to the sponsor's logo and say, yeah, go, Mitwald. Great. That was a smart idea, which worked remarkably well. There was a hell lot of people at that booth asking questions about the CMS, and during the first couple of hours, it was a strange atmosphere. I was at the Joomla booth, I had the Drupal booth next to me, and those guys started throwing balloons with Drupal at me while I was in the middle of a talk. So it was some kind of bitching around during the first couple of hours. But then came the large lunch break. The audience was more or less gone, and we had some time to actually talk to each other. And we realized that there's no reason to bitch, that it's actually interesting to talk to other guys, learn about their concepts, to realize that they share the same problems and have found smart solutions for it. And with this positive experience in mind, we thought it would be a good idea to repeat such an event, have another CeBIT booth, but without Mitwald, or the hosting company. And that was starting point for CMS Garden. CMS Garden is the thing that brings me here, and where those fancy hats are coming from. The name itself is coming from the idea that a garden becomes beautiful if you have many different flowers. If it's just one, it looks poor. So the more flowers, the better. And we started with 4 CMS, planning that booth for 2013, and we made a shout out to the CMS community in general if someone might be interested to join us. Surprisingly, there were a few people interested, and so in 2013, we were 12 systems having that shared CMS booth. Many of those are based on PHP. We have Plone, which is Python-based, Scientific on the bottom left. That's Java-based. OpenCMS is also Java-based, Django, Python. In the meantime, we also have Umbraco on board, which is .NET. So various technologies, but all CMS and all proper open source, not those, semi-commercial stuff, real open source. And it worked quite well. That's a photo of the 2013 booth. We didn't really count it, but from the feedback that we got, we assumed that we had approximately 10,000 visitors at the booth, which upset quite a lot of other people in that hall, because our booth was always crowded. The other booths were all empty, and they actually made a complaint at the fair, assuming that we are giving something illegal away for free, because they couldn't explain how that much interest was coming. All those guys from the CMS were there as volunteers. They even, I think, paid their own travel, so it boiled down to 100 volunteers during that week, being at the fair and showing people the awesomeness of open source CMS. And during that booth, we had 3 things happening. The one thing was for the ambassadors themselves. They had the chance to look into other CMS. They realized, oh, that solution for that specific problem actually is a smart one. And they also learned that the very own CMS has its limits, that there are use cases where using Drupal simply doesn't make sense, or using Joomla doesn't make sense. And having that knowledge about all those other tools helps a lot, because if you only know one tool, if you only know a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And that's something that CMS Garden did to the ambassadors. What we did to the visitors was we spread the word of open source, of course, and we showed them that for every use case, there's the proper CMS to solve that issue. There's no need to use proprietary software. That's the main thing. And last but not least, something happened that we didn't plan. We realized that the widespreadness of the systems involved in CMS Garden is actually attractive to industry partners. Because if you take a look at the global internet, with the systems involved in CMS Garden, 1 in 3 of those websites is based on one of our systems. And if you look at CMS-based sites, it's 75%, 3 or 4 run on a CMS that's part of the garden. And that makes CMS Garden, at least in the German-speaking area, a very, very attractive single point of contact. If you have anything about an open source CMS, ask us, and we'll forward the information to all the other guys. There's no need to build up contacts with 12 different guys from 12 different systems. That became very attractive for a lot of other events, and so we started some sort of CMS world tour, at least through German-speaking countries. CMS Garden became very attractive for web hosts. That's what made us end up at CloudFest, the world's largest hosting fair. And CMS Garden became very, very attractive for the IT security industry. Why? because our CMS are the worst case scenario of IT security. We have complex systems. They are very easily analyzable because they are open source, they're free of charge. You can get them, you can start analyzing them right away. You can run any tool on it. You have the source code. Normally, they are running on very powerful machines with more than enough bandwidth, and they are remotely accessible 24/7 by design, because that's what they are built for. And they are normally built by a professional, but very, very often run by someone with less technical knowledge and with a lack of security awareness. And that's not the best combination, to put it very nicely. And so what we see and what the industry sees is this. CMS-based websites get hacked. Okay, the customer calls an agency, they fix the site, problem solved. Right? No, of course not. Because having that site hacked and causing an issue for the actual guy running that site is only a very, very minor part of the problem. The real fun part happens in the background, because this hacked site is used for spamming. All sorts of phishing links get distributed. Someone sends email with ransomware around. You get a phishing site hosted on here. You get malware embedded in the site if it's not in defacement like here. That causes drive-by exploits. End-user PCs get hacked. So it's a huge chain of problems that is associated to hacked websites. And our client being hacked is only the tiniest problem in that whole chain. Last year, I went to Internet Security Days, a German fair on internet security, and there was one guy from a big antivirus company presenting some stats. And the most significant stat was that 2 of 3 end-user PCs are still infected with malware by drive-by exploits. So while browsing the web. And if you think about our CMS's market share in that web, you realize how big the issue is that we are causing. For that reason, we had a gazillion companies from the IT security industry, or at least with some association to IT security, reaching out to us. There was the German Ministry for IT Security. Yes, we have our own ministry for that. They were doing 2 studies on CMS security, and were looking for some input from experts. The first one got published. The second one hasn't been published for reasons that nobody was able to explain to me. But they discovered quite a lot of vulnerabilities in popular CMS, so it had a big benefit. We got in touch with Switch, which is running the .ch domain, which is one part, but also works as some sort of web host association in Switzerland. And they reached out to us and asked if we could do a workshop with Swiss web hosts about CMS security. And one of the most basic things that I realized in this workshop was how limited the flow of information from the CMS to the hosters actually is. They were stumbling upon very basic problems like, how can we identify the systems, the CMS that are hosted on our servers, and what versions they are using. That was the primary issue in that workshop. We have web hosts contacting us frequently, especially the abuse departments, when they stumble upon new attack scenarios, when they see a big attack wave kicking in. That's feedback that comes back to me. And same applies to AV companies. If they see, if they make interesting observations, that gets passed along to us in order to have some sort of exchange. And from time to time, we even have the police contacting us. There was a funny call in my office. The phone rang, I lifted, and the guy was saying, this is the cybercrime department of your local police. And I was like, plugging off the cable, one never knows. But they were actually just asking for a Joomla issue. That was interesting. Last but not least, we got in touch with a project called Initiative S. That's where Savikas is now coming in again. That was a government-funded project in, I think, 2012 to 2014-ish, something like this. It was built by the initiative, the Association of the German Internet Industry, ECHO, and what they did was pretty much building a small web interface around ClamAV. So you could enter your domain there, and they did a malware scan of the source code once per day. That was Initiative S. It was an interesting concept, but we had our questions about the effect, to put it nicely. And while being in touch with them, they also said, well, guys, it seems like you are having some smart ideas about CMS security. Let's do a successor project, and this is where Savikas is coming from. It's funded by Germany's Ministry of Economics. Started in 2016, and it's funded by the Ministry of Economics because this ministry wants to make SMBs' websites and SMBs' IT more secure. So this is where the money's coming from and why it's coming from them. We're having 4 partners in total, which is ECO, the initiative of the internet industry. We're having the Ruhr University of Bochum. They are one of the latest and greatest universities when it comes to IT security, really experienced guys with a very proven track record also in the general IT security industry, not only CMS. We have Hackminute, which is a startup also coming from Rupp, and CMS Garden. The later ones are associated partners. That's why their logos need to be a little smaller than the real partners. That's part of the paperwork. I love government-funded projects. That's also one of the lessons learned. If you as a CMS community ever want to start a government-funded project, look for an experienced partner. If you want to start such a project from scratch, you'll have no chance, at least within the EU, because the threshold in order to get such a project through is very high. It's a ton of paperwork, and you need to know very precisely what to put in all those papers and what not. Otherwise, you're screwed. And that's also the main part of ECO in our project. That helps a lot. Savikas in general has 3 things that's being done. One is awareness building. That's our fancy explanation video for your carpenter next door, how to subscribe to Savikas. That's mainly done also by ECO because they're really good at marketing and networking, all this stuff. So they reach out to our end customers, which is not really the agency that builds the site, but the owner of the site that has to maintain it later on. We do press articles, we have those fancy videos, and that's the lovely part that I'm very happy that I don't have to do it. ECO goes to those end-user events like go to the local police station in Darmstadt and do a 45-minute talk on website security in front of carpenters. Do the same in the local commerce chamber somewhere in Saxonia. That's done by ECO with quite surprising results because normally the session is being built like 40 minutes general awareness building and what does SIWECOS, and people often sit there like this. And then the last 5 minutes is about legal consequences if you don't keep up with your website, and then everyone is awake again and asking a ton of questions, because this is where the main motivation for end users is coming from. Keep the site safe to keep your money, not facing legal consequences. So that's task number 1, awareness building. Number 2, that's software now, is a scanning service that we are offering at SIWECOS.de. Right now, the site is German only, sorry, but we're working on it. It's because it's based on WordPress and that can't do proper multilingual, so I'm switching it to Joomla right now because that's working. The whole scanning thing is based on an API. It's open source. You can embed it in whatever you want. It gives you a score between 0 and 100 to give you an idea how secure or insecure the setup of that site is. We had lengthy discussions within the team how to provide that feedback. The first idea was to just have a signal, an ample, green, yellow, red. But that would have meant that if you come above a certain threshold, the light would always show green, regardless if there's anything left to do. So that's where we came to that 0 to 100 score. I'm still not perfectly happy with it, but it's getting in the right direction. Behind that score, we have a total of 5 scanners. Ignore the scanner thing. 5 scanners being in there. The first one is the one that I'm most excited about because I don't see any usage of those HTTP headers so far in popular web applications. HTTP as a protocol can submit headers, and in those headers, you are able to tell modern web browsers to enable specific security features. For example, there's a feature, the X-frame options header, where you can tell the web browser, please block embedding of that site in an iframe. That's interesting because you can prevent clickjacking attacks with this. No major CMS sets it by default. You should set a proper content type header because otherwise you might be able to trick the browser in handling HTML code as something else and executing scripts and those kind of things. You can set the HSTS header, which forces a browser to always open that site on a secured connection. You can tell the browser using the XSS header to enable its built-in cross-site scripting prevention. And my personal favorite, there's a header called Content Security Policy. And with that header, you can tell a browser very specifically which JavaScripts, which fonts, which images, which CSS belongs to that site and what doesn't. That's interesting because you can more or less completely solve cross-site scripting issues in legacy CMS with that issue. Because all those legacy CMS like Joomla use PHP as a templating engine, so you as a developer need to be super smart and escape each and every output in order to prevent cross-site scripting. Switching the templating system is a big legacy break. Ecosystem doesn't like it. So what we'll, for example, do with Joomla 4 is we'll be enabling and enforcing a very strict content security policy by default in order to mitigate cross-site scripting after it happened. The other scanner is InfoLeak. It checks if you're, for example, exposing the used CMS and its version number somewhere in the source code. It checks if you're having unobfuscated email addresses, stuff like that. TLS is also a pretty nice one. Most of you probably know Qualys SSL Labs, that site where you can enter your domain and it checks how good the SSL encryption works. We have our own version of that, which is open source, and which is built by the guys who reported, I think, 6 of the latest 10 issues in OpenSSL. And once they reported it, the scanner is updated the other day, so it's really bleeding edge when it comes to SSL vulnerabilities. We are doing a malware and phishing check. That's what's been taken over from Initiative S. We scan your source code and we do a check if your site is listed on known spam or phishing sources. And we have the DOM XSS scanner, which, yeah, is a specific attack vector for cross-site scripting. All of this stuff is put behind one single API. It's extensible, and if you want, you could even host it yourself in a local network. No need to use our service. We built some CMS plugins on top. We have the one for Joomla done and being published on the extensions directory. The WordPress plugin is done, and I need to kick Robert a little harder to actually have it published. Typo3 is work in progress. Drupal, I think nobody stepped up so far. So if you're interested in writing a small plugin or module, I think it's called in Drupal, let me know. It's straightforward. All those plugins basically just do two things. One is it displays the current score right in the administration area of your site, because that's where most users actually log in, hopefully once a year. And the other thing is, if you sign up for our service, you need to go through a validation process, like Google Webmaster Tools have an HTML file put somewhere. That's what's being optimized with those plugins. And all of this, plugins, scanning services, scanner itself, is open source, real open source. We had quite some resistances to actually make it open source, because at least for German government projects, it's rather unusual to really give it away and just let someone else do it, like we as open source communities do it all the time. We heard the usual arguments. Everyone can look in our code. That's insecure. They are going to take all the plugins and all the stuff and sell it. But I think that's one of the big advantages from having real open source communities being involved. We overcame that resistances, and now it's proper open source. All of this is a nice service. I really see some benefits, especially from the header scanning part. But if we want to be honest with each other, we in this room, it's not going to protect a user in a real-world attack, especially when we're talking about the nasty stuff, remote code executions, like Drupal, I think, had recently one with the form API, right? We have those in Joomla too. You see those SQL injections frequently in all major CMS, and all of this, yeah, CIWECOS, the scanning part, won't help you, to be honest. That's sad, but we have a solution for this too. Because if you think about the issue handling process in major CMS, we are in a very lucky position, because most of those issues that we're patching get reported upfront with quite a while upfront. So there's a security researcher, they find an issue, they reach out to me as the Joomla team and say, look, there's a critical issue, can you please go fix it? I'll then start writing the patch, we communicate with the researcher in the background, we make sure it's properly patched, we do a pre-announcement to the community letting them know that this is a very, very important patch that needs to be applied right away. We publish the patch, people might apply it, and problem would be solved. Reality is, we have this guy kicking in again, the guy that isn't even aware that he's having a site running Joomla, because the last time he was logged in is 2 years ago or something like this. So it's an awareness and a maintenance problem. Maintenance is the thing in this whole process. Those users are way too slow. And even if they are aware, even if you have a small agency, there still might be a significant risk that those are too late. Because once you've released a critical patch, you have about 6 to 8 hours to apply it. And if you don't do so, regardless of the used system, you can consider yourself hacked. There's this quite popular quote from Drupal Jardin in 2014, I think. And exactly the same thing applies to any major CMS. I have exactly the same numbers in the Joomla community, and the same is also with WordPress. So, that's quite frustrating, at least from a security team's perspective, because we did everything right. And the only thing that we need would be someone on the other side who's security aware, who's there 24/7, and who has an interest, a benefit from applying those patches right away, someone like this guy. That would be cool if we had such an administrator in each and every site. And thinking about, we actually have such an administrator. We have the web hosts, the companies that power the servers behind our websites. Those guys, hopefully, have some basic technical knowledge. They hopefully have some basic security awareness, and they have a massive benefit when sites are patched in a narrow time window, because once a site gets hacked, they start sending spam. They have a lot of support effort. And having support effort, especially in normal shared hosting, the cheap ones, means that each and every support case pretty much eats up your revenue for that client for a year to 1.5. So it's a financial issue, a big one. Solution one could be we just make the web hosts patch those installations, changing the files. For two reasons, that's a nasty idea. Reason number one, something might break because maybe the customer has applied some custom stuff somewhere around in other files, and stuff breaks frequently. And the other thing is it's a legal issue. You need to be allowed to change your client's files. So the other solution, let's just filter all those things. Many web hosting companies have filtering solutions in place anyway. They want to filter brute force login stuff on a VP login PHP. So those applications, those firewalls are there anyway. But they aren't used so far for two reasons, at least for this kind of exploit. Number one, the web hosting company needs time to develop such a rule. So they see, oh, there's a patch coming from. If they have an experienced PHP developer, the guy might be able to build a rule from seeing the patch file, but that takes time and all those things. And if they're relying on a commercial provider for those rules, it just takes 24, 48 hours until that specific rule is now part of the rule set that they're buying. Way too slow. And the other reason why they don't use web application firewalls in large scale is that rules tend to break stuff if they aren't built very specifically for the very specific issue. And that's the beauty of the SIWECOS web host service, that's how we called it. It's a cooperation between the actual CMS security teams and major web hosting companies. And what I do as a security guy for Joomla is once I get a critical report about a security issue, I build a patch. And I also think about, can this very specific issue be filtered with a web application firewall in a bulletproof way? Bulletproof means, is the request exploiting that issue so specific that it can't be a valid one? Because obvious reasons, if it can also be a valid one, hosts won't apply it because they are breaking sites. And for the majority of issues, that's the case. If you took a look at the latest Drupal release, again, this form API stuff, the patch was a web application firewall rule applied within PHP. Nothing different. So that could also have been patched server-side. And that's what I do. I figure out that rule set, and I send the rule set via email to all those web hosting companies at the exact same moment where the patch is released. This gives the web hosting companies a 6 to 8 hour window to apply those rules, which is normally big enough for them to do some tests and apply it. And then with this one single email, I can protect, I did some rough calculations, about 5 million Joomla installations. That's a pretty good effort to output ratio, at least for me. All those things are sent via email, but we also have a small API internally where we expose those rules. Right now, we have about 150 web hosts on the list. Many of them are smaller German web hosts because it's German, sorry. But also some international players, especially the big ones. So you have GoDaddy, DrupalEurope, OVH, 1&1, Strato. Those are the bigger ones, at least in Europe. And it's based on an invite system. So it's free of charge. All I want to do is that if the abuse guy at 1&1 knows, oh, there's an abuse guy at Host Europe, and he should use that too, then he can invite it based on the trust level. That's working quite well. I have a pretty interesting number from one single company during the latest Joomla incident. Within the first 24 hours after the patch was released, the rule had seen 2.4 million hits. That's 100,000 hits per hour, and a couple of customers being protected because of that. This gives us some pretty good feedback from the web hosts for obvious reasons. Straightforward for them, saves a bunch of money, which they can invest in great events like this one. And we're doing this service for a number of major applications, and you're now asking why braces around Drupal. The communication with the Drupal security team was a bit bumpy during the last couple of years. That's one of the reasons why I'm here. I would love to change that and bring the service up and running again, because for the latest incidents that we saw with Drupal, SIWECOS web host service would have made a huge difference. Yeah, so that's my personal pet project, the web host service, and it's an easy way to eliminate the weakest link in the chain of responsibility, the end user. It requires minimal effort on our side. It only requires some basic knowledge about web application firewall rules in the security teams. We're offering a training for this, so not a big hurdle. And I think it's a great example of how cooperation between CMS, especially in the security area, where it makes great sense. Savikas in general is a great example where cooperation between CMS makes sense, because we wouldn't get a government funding in the first place if we don't represent the web. But especially in the security part, there's a ton of stuff that we could learn from each other and where we could find common solutions. And I think it's long overdue to do so, because if you recapitulate to the number that I mentioned earlier, 2/3 of end-user PCs are infected via drive-by exploits, then you realize that we have a huge responsibility in making the web a safer place. We need to stop thinking about the issue as, oh, my client's site is hacked. We need to be aware that we're the starting point, and the very important starting point, in a very, very long chain of problems. And we need to take this responsibility serious and change something about it. And I think cooperation is the key here. And you need to be aware that this problem is significantly enough for the German government to spend a seven-digit number in euros on it. It's huge. So, let's work on it. Any questions? No? That's fine. If you have any questions later on or want to talk to me about SIWECOS or Joomla or my favorite pasta recipe, find me. I'm here all 3 days. I'm most likely hanging out in the Open Web Lounge, which is right on the other side of the corridor. Yeah, come to me, talk, and enjoy the event. Thank you.